Hey, my name's Sanne Roeven, and this is my poster presentation. I created this presentation for my capstone project in international studies, and the focus of our class has been on commemoration. And so my poster presentation is talking about commemoration in Sarajevo, and specifically the War Childhood Museum there. I had the opportunity while I was studying abroad in 2018 to visit the museum, and it really made a really big impression on me and helped me understand better what children's experiences in war, specifically in Sarajevo, but also war in general, are, and gave me a better understanding of the city. And honestly, I just really felt the emotional connection in those stories while I was there. So when I found out that our topic was going to be on commemoration, I was really excited to be able to use my experience to learn more about this museum that impacted me so much. And I was curious if it also impacted other visitors. So in order to research that, I looked at TripAdvisor reviews of the museum from 2017, when it was first founded, up until 2019. And I coded those reviews to find out the major themes that came out and that people were talking about. To understand the museum, it's important to understand the historical context that it comes into. So Sarajevo as a city has been inhabited since Roman times. It's always been a crossroads of civilization. It was a city in the Ottoman Empire, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then in Yugoslavia, that it has this really rich cultural past that led to a very mixed multi-ethnic city that historically was very multicultural. But unfortunately, during the war, those ethnic divides were used to divide people, and it really destroyed the multicultural identity that had existed before then, and divided people very strongly into their own ethno-nationalist groups of Bosniak, Serb, and Croat. Coming out of that, because of this strong divide, I mean, even the government is divided, that there are three governments, one for each of these ethno-nationalist groups. And this leads to difficulty in getting funding for museums, that to get funding you need to ascribe to one of these nationalist groups, and difficulty in discourse around the war. So it's really important for the War Childhood Museum that it is apolitical. So it takes that political aspect out, and its focus is solely on the children who were victims of the war, who had nothing to do with the cause, and ultimately lost their childhoods because of it, and lost agency in the war. And so this museum provides a space to return that agency to those children and allow them to tell their own stories, what they want to tell in the way that they want to tell it, and give that space. So to look at what people's responses were to this, like I said, I used TripAdvisor, which is a growing resource. It is a user-generated content site, which means that the reviews and everything that are posted on there are posted by users. So by you or I, when we go and visit something, we can go in and edit the TripAdvisor site and post a review. And interestingly, according to one study, those reviews from user-generated sites are trusted more than traditional knowledge sources such as travel agencies or brochures or things like that, that people feel this connection with the creator of the review, even though they don't actually know them, and that makes them trust the review more. So the reviews are important and valued by potential visitors, and they also give a really interesting insight for scholars to be able to see what people's reactions to certain sites have been. So for my research, I looked at 378 reviews in English, Spanish, and Dutch, and I took those reviews and I initially coded them to see the main themes that came out, and then from that I took specific reviews to analyze deeper that had some of the specific themes that I was looking for. The most common theme that I found was an emotional response. So, for example, if you look at figure 2, that has this very emotional review talking about, well, it ends saying that words could not describe what they felt, but they use a very imagery-rich language to talk about laughter and joy and contrast that with silence and having tears in their eyes. Importantly, they say at one point that they were reading the stories as if it were their own memories. And I bring that up because Caroline Wake, who is a scholar in performing arts and those studies, she talks about this concept of tertiary witnessing. So primary witnessing is when you are in the same time and space as an event, a traumatic event. So you witness that in the same time and space that it happens. Secondary witnessing is what you would, think about when that primary witness is sharing their experience. So they are, telling their testimony of what happened, and the person with them is able to have that emotional response and be there with them at the same time that they're sharing that response. But tertiary witnessing happens when maybe you're viewing some sort of testimony and you respond with an emotional, empathetic response, but you're not present either temporally or spatially. And I think that is what is happening, at least for some of these reviewers, where they talk about this very strong, emotional, empathetic response. And this could be what Wake calls tertiary witnessing. Another theme that came out is reflection, whether that be on themselves, on current events, or on the war. The museum sparked reflection in its visitors. So if you look at figure 3, it is the on the top left, and this user talks about the war and the war children's experiences and puts it into the context of their own childhood, talking about how the toys and clothes that they had were similar, but how they had completely different values and different meanings growing up in a peaceful situation versus growing up in a war zone. And finally, some users decided to share images as well. These can be really useful for highlighting what they felt was valuable and what they really wanted to share in a way that isn't possible with words, to really be able to describe it very visually. And also that it was moving. If you look at figure 4, this user talks about how the museum was moving. In conclusion, I used an interdisciplinary approach for this research. I looked at articles and scholars from tourism to understand the TripAdvisor better. I looked at anthropological and ethnographic articles, cultural studies scholars. I looked at history, although one of the challenges I found is that because the history of Sarajevo, specifically in the war, is so recent, a lot of historians aren't talking about it yet. That this is something that can definitely grow as time goes on and as historians look at it more. I think that we will get a better historical lens, but it's still really valuable. And having this really broad interdisciplinary approach allowed me to take this issue and look at it from many different perspectives and ultimately get a deeper understanding of the issue and a better way to understand people's reactions and why the museum was created and maybe why some or what some of the user reactions might signify. I think that this research and this method of having museums can be super valuable in the future, especially for sharing the stories of other marginalized groups, and could be really interesting for future museums. I know that the Work Childhood Museum has an outreach program. They're currently making another museum in New York. But I think that there can be a lot more museums that use a similar idea of sharing testimony, but not necessarily about, war childhood, but, other groups that were denied agency to be able to restore that agency. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation and looking at my poster. And that's all. I think there's a questions bar. If you have any questions, I will do my best to answer anything. All right. Thank you.